Hello and welcome to the Your Financial Pharmacist Real Estate Investing Podcast, a show all about empowering pharmacists to achieve financial freedom through real estate investing. I'm Nate Hedrick, and each week, my co-host David Bright and I explore stories from pharmacists all over the country who are achieving their real estate goals while maintaining a meaningful career in pharmacy. Whether you're a first-time investor or a seasoned pro, we're here to provide education and inspiration about the world of real estate. Please note, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.
Before we jump into the episode, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Lima1 Capital. Are you a real estate investor looking for the right lender that can finance all your deals and help you scale? Lima1 Capital is the best suite of loan products in the industry. Whether that's fix and flips, fix and holds, building new construction, or buying rental properties, they have incredible financing solutions for it all. A reliable, common sense lender is one of the most important parts of your investment team, and that's exactly what you get at Lima1. Let Lima1 Capital show you how they've helped thousands of real estate investors scale and increase their wealth. Check them out at lima1.com/YFP or call 800-259-0595 to speak with a consultant in preparation for your next project. That's lima1.com/YFP.
Hey, David, how's it going?
Hey, good, thanks. How you doing, man?
Good. It's been a challenging week, but it's been a good one. We had a little bit of a setback on that property we've been working on, that flip. The flip/rent, we haven't decided yet, but a little bit of an inspection problem, but we'll get it sorted out. Nothing a little time and money can't fix.
Yeah, it is frustrating when hiccups kind of happen towards the end of a project, particularly in this season of just everybody's busy. So if you need to find a contractor or if you need something done quickly in summer, like this is just tough. So yeah, I hope you're able to wrap that up quickly and get that done.
Yeah, normally this is a thing that I would take on myself and just go get it fixed and get it done, but it requires a permit, and I'm not, because I'm the homeowner, but I'm not living there, this municipality won't allow me to do the work. So I'm not a licensed contractor, so I can't actually do that work. So pro tip, you can't always do everything yourself, even if you want to. So I'll have to figure that out, but we'll get there, I promise.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a good tip. You know, that's a detail that should not go overlooked, right? To make sure that everybody is, you've got the right people doing the right things on the project to get it to the finish line. So yeah, that's how it goes. So
that's all right. We'll get it ready for selling soon, I promise.
Good. Yeah. And I'll be really curious how you turn out with selling versus renting. Yeah. You know, it sounds like you're leaning towards selling this one.
We'll see. Yeah, that's the theme of the week, but I think I'm just tired of it. So that's probably why.
No, I've definitely been there on flips before where towards the end, it's like, I just want something else to do. Like, I just want to not think about this one anymore. So yeah, we just got a couple under contract, and I'm hoping that at least one of these is going to be a smaller project. So hopefully I won't get sick of it. The other one's going to be a little bit more work, but yeah. So we're fortunate to have found a couple properties in a crazy market right now, which is just kind of fun.
Yeah, and that's actually what we want to talk about today, right? So the theme of today's episode is about finding properties, and specifically finding properties when they're outside your local market or when you need to act really fast. And so you may not be able to see that property. So how can we do that, right? That's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. And I feel like for those of us that have bought a house that we're living in, you know, like the headache and the hassle of walking all these properties, like we're just kind of used to that, walking through with a realtor, checking things out, being super careful and methodical. You know, that's very time consuming to look at every nook and cranny of a bunch of houses before deciding. And so this whole like pace thing of like needing an instant answer can just feel like a foreign concept to those of us that haven't bought a primary residence in the last few years in this kind of crazy market. So particularly frustrating when you're in that situation needing to act quickly.
Yeah, it's definitely different when you're thinking about, rental versus primary residence, right? With a primary residence, you're the one that's going to be living there. You have to really be, in the weeds on it and making sure you like it. But it's still important. I mean, even if you're buying a rental and you can't put eyes on it, you still want to be able to have that confidence that it's going to be a good property and that you can move quickly on it and it's going to work for you.
Yeah. And so every few episodes like we do, we take this kind of pause and we do a deep dive into a concept that's been brought up or a question that's come around. And this is a question that's come to us pretty frequently lately of how do I act quickly on a house, particularly if it's not in my own market. But how do I get this done, especially if I can't get inside of it? Like, this is just a awkward thing to do. And so what are some tips to get that done?
And this is something that I've had to do with other investor clients, right? Someone that doesn't live in the Cleveland area but wants to invest here. So how can I, as a realtor, be able to serve them as the boots on the ground, right? Can we send videos? Can we send pictures? I've done FaceTime and virtual showings. I mean, you name it, there are ways to get around this. David, you've done the same thing as right, because even though you're pretty local, you still a lot easier just to have that FaceTime video as a way to walk through a house, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we found that a few years ago, I just had this moment where I was walking through a house with a realtor and with a contractor, and I would look at something and not realize what I was really looking at, but the realtor would see something through realtor eyes. The contractor would see something through contractor eyes. And I was just standing there, like, bringing essentially no value. I'm like, that is a roof. Like, that wall is gray. Like, but I just had no value that I was bringing to that beyond what kind of pictures and video and opinion of the experts would show. And so I realized it didn't make sense for me to walk houses anymore, but instead it was important for me to develop a process by which I could buy houses without ever being inside of it.
I love that. So again, because of the way the market's going, because we've gotten this question a bunch of times, I think this is a perfect conversation for right now, how to buy a house without going inside it. So
yeah, and we've talked through this before the episode. And so we thought there's really three key areas that we want to talk about. One is the people involved. Two is the criteria. And then the third one is making that offer. And each piece of that puzzle, you can detach from the need to physically be there if you operationalize those concepts correctly.
Yeah, and we get that some of this is not easy, right? Some of you are going to hear this and say, that's crazy. I'm not going to buy a house without seeing it. I need to be inside, right? Especially for detail-oriented pharmacists like ourselves. Or if you're caught in analysis paralysis, right? That can be like I got to see it, that can hold us back. And so a lot of us that have bought personal residences, like we mentioned before, we're used to that. It seems like part of the process. But one of the keys to jumping into real estate quickly, and one of the things that can really elevate your ability to offer on more properties or to get under contract on more deals, is to be able to do this in real time and do so without having to see the property, especially if you're still working as a full-time pharmacist, right? You might have a deal come in the market at 8:00 in the morning and have 10 offers by noon, right? And so we don't always get the luxury of being able to go see a property.
Yeah. And I think that's made a huge difference for our ability to move forward and grow our investing, is just to back out of that needing to be in it. So with that, let's kick off for those three key areas. So again, the people involved, the criteria that you need to set, and figuring out that offer. So Nate, let's start off with the people. Who might be the right sort of people to walk a property if it's not going to be you personally?
Yeah, I think and again, this is probably a biased answer, right? But I think the easy answer is your realtor, right? You should have a really good real estate agent. They should be able to walk that property for you. In almost all cases, you have to have a real estate agent accessing that property for you legally. In many states, many municipalities, the agent is the one in charge of the keys, right? They are responsible for allowing people into that property. And a lot of times they can only allow another agent to do so. So if I'm selling the property, I can only allow another agent to access that property with the keys. And so the realtor's a perfect fit, right? They can be the boots on the ground. They are designed to go see properties. They have access, and they can do a pretty good job of looking for the big things, right? One of the things that I do with my clients a lot when I walk a property, I'm not a contractor, but I know if something is big and scary, right? So if I see the roof caving in or I see a wall that's bowed, I can bring attention to that very easily. And with a video, we can start walking down that road. So the easy kind of first person I think of immediately, and again, full bias here, is your real estate agent. Again, especially if you're a really good one.
Yeah, but particularly if you're looking for just knocking off those big kind of veto criteria. Like, I have a vivid memory of walking a house with our realtor a few years ago, and we walked and we're like, this house is pretty nice. We're walking around, we get into the kitchen and there's a big gaping hole in the ceiling, and we're literally looking at daylight, and you can see that it had rained the day before. There's a giant puddle on the floor. Like, the ceiling had literally just collapsed in the kitchen. We're like, okay, we're done. This is out. And so like, that some of those things that are just like clearly obvious criteria, if that's something that you're not willing to work with, a homemade skylight, then, you can skip that. Or if the furnace is just not there, if the house has been vacant for so long that someone ripped out the furnace, the copper, the water heater, like maybe that's just a sign that that's not a house you want to invest in. So if there's criteria like that, a realtor can be a great kind of first pass without needing the technical expertise of a home inspector or contractor. But tell me about home inspector and contractor in this equation too.
Yeah, that's like kind of the next level up, right? So you could have a contractor walk it or have a home inspector walk it before putting in the offer. There's obviously more costs associated with doing this in almost all cases, unless you have an employee that is a contractor or something, you're going to have to pay the individuals to go walk that property in that case. But that's going to be able to get you a much better idea of what the property is going to be dealing with. So ideally, if you are someone that does a lot of this and you're often doing rehabs or working on properties, you might have a contractor that you know is going to be doing the work. And so you have them walk that site and say, look, yeah, Nate, this is going to be $40,000 just to get it to the level that you always wanted up to or whatever. So you can have that person involved right from the beginning so that you don't have to worry about an inspection period or any sort of contingencies because you've got it all figured out right from the jump. Again, the downside to this is obviously that that's a lot of a professional's time and it could be pretty expensive to do so.
Yeah, and that is a definite trade-off. We've gone with both approaches and both have been helpful in certain situations. Oftentimes I'll find a property when I'm searching the MLS in the evening. I'll text my realtor. My realtor will coordinate a showing for either her or the contractor to attend. And then when I get out of work the next day, that what's been really helpful is that then I can check a set of videos or a set of photos and really get a good idea. And then even jump on the phone with someone that's been in it. And, like, what did it feel like? Tell me about that foundation. Like, what's this thing that you said, like, that I should be afraid of? And why should I be afraid of that? Like, I can get those kind of lessons from the professionals along the way. And it's just super helpful to do that and to have, maybe 15 minutes invested in the whole thing, but to have really professional opinions on that property.
Yeah, that's exactly why you have those pros involved, right? You've got a real estate agent or your contractor, whoever you need to feel comfortable. Involving them earlier takes you out of that equation. Like you said earlier, you're not the one that is going to find the problem, right? Necessarily that the contractor can see. And so engaging with those people early on, it's just going to make your life easier. It allows you to focus on your pharmacy career or whatever else you want to spend your time on and let the pros do what they're good at.
Yeah. And I find it super helpful too, because the pros can really boil things down nicely too. Like, I remember one of the first houses that we walked in Toledo when my wife and I were just getting started in this early on. We walked in this living room and like all the furniture was laid out super awkwardly. And we're like, this is just such a weird house. And my realtor's like, well, all you would do is like do this, this, this. And like, oh yeah. But like, so I'm just like stuck in like furniture layout in the living room instead of anything of pertinent value about that house, right? Because that's just the gear you can slip into when you walk into a house. But a professional that's done this hundreds of times just looks around and they can really boil it down to a series of data points that's easier for a pharmacist to chew on.
And I really like that when you're trying to make a decision is having your criteria, right? And that actually leads right to our second point, which is criteria. So knowing what your criteria are, knowing how to take into account for what those things are, and then make a decision based on that. So David, what are some key data points that you use to make a decision quickly?
Yeah, I think that it's really important for a pharmacist to set up that criteria very clear in advance so that when you get that data in from the professional, you know how to vet that and you know if this property is a fit or not. We've talked about criteria several times when it's buying a house. I know for me, one of the first things that I do before even asking a professional to walk the house is to try to make sure that the math works, because I don't want to ask my realtor to invest a bunch of time to pay a contractor to go out and look at a house if I get all the information back and I'm like, oh, that thing's like negative $800 a month in cash flow. That'll never work, right? Like, I want to make sure that the math is reasonable. So usually I can flip through MLS photos and I can see, maybe this kitchen is terrible and would need redone, or maybe I could see giant holes ripped into the carpet and so it needs new flooring. Like, maybe there's some obvious things that I can start to ballpark just from pictures, like estimate those repair costs, estimate rent, things like that. And just doing some basic rule of thumb kind of things. Like, I can take the square footage of a property in my market, multiply that by 8 and figure out what it's going to take to do paint and flooring. It's like a 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom house. I know that that's a $9,600 paint and flooring job ish, right? And so like, we'll get in the ballpark for some of these things. If I look through the photos and the furnace looks super, super old, maybe add $4,000 and then see if a contractor increases that or decreases that at a later stage. But I at least want to get in the ballpark and make sure that is right. And that's where going through that math, like we did back on episode 50, is really helpful to see what will this property rent for? What are the monthly expenses? What's the mortgage payment going to be? And then will this have positive cash flow at the end of the month if it's set up as a long-term rental property, as an example?
So, David, I meant to ask this because someone with your level of experience, like, again, just hearing you talk through that, like, a 1,200 square foot house is $9,600. Like, what are you having someone come through and confirm then, right? It feels like you almost have it figured out right from the get-go.
No, I think it's almost the opposite. Like, I feel like I can only just barely get in the ballpark because once a contractor gets in there, I feel like there are times, I would imagine you've seen this as well, when realtors are really good at taking the photo from like the perfect angle to make a house look way better than it is, right? And so you walk in there and that's what I'm really afraid of. Like, I'm really wanting someone to be in the house to look for those really big or scary issues. Like, is the foundation bad? Is there a roof issue? Are there plumbing or mechanical issues? Things like that. I want to know if my ballpark math is way off or if it's reasonably close, because that contractor is going to be able to go through and they're going to be able to say, like, yeah, this house could probably get painted for about $4,000. This is probably going to be more in flooring because there's this bad subfloor thing going on in the bathroom. Like, they can adjust that budget up or down and tell me, is my like $30,000 budget really high or really low, or am I close? But you can really only vet those things by being inside of the property.
We were talking about taking the photos from the right angle. You reminded me, was it you and I that were looking at the property that I was like, David, this house looks great. And you're like, pull up the Google Street View. And if you looked at it from the right instead of the left, there was like an adult video or bookstore like right next to the house, but they had taken the picture from the wrong angle so you couldn't see it.
Oh, absolutely. Like, yeah, there's all kinds of, you just got to be careful with the photos that are out there on the MLS. They don't always tell the entire story of what's going on with the house, for sure.
And, it reminded me as well, the other thing I like to look for when I'm doing a search like that or diving into the property and not just looking at it on the surface, right, is actually trying to vet things like, what is the resale on this, right? So obviously the numbers have to work for my client up front, or if I'm investing, it has to work for me up front. But if I can serve a client by saying, look, as an agent, this house is going to sell down the road really well because of X, Y, and Z, or conversely, it's going to be difficult to sell because once you get there, this layout is actually really awkward. And even though the numbers look good and on paper, like, yeah, it's only this level of rehab and that's fine. But once you get in the house, this corner is awful and you'll never be able to use it as what you want to, or, things like that can actually be really helpful by just being that boots on the ground.
Yeah. And that's something where, as a pharmacist, I can get like way too deep into spreadsheet mode and be like, but this house is 1,400 square feet. And a realtor can say like, but the layout is awful. No one's ever going to want to buy this house. No one's ever going to rent this house. And so like some of those qualitative issues are really helpful by having that person that's in there as well.
Yeah. And so, okay, so you're walking through all these things, you're looking at the key criteria, you've got the people involved, but, are you right at that point ready to make an offer then?
I think that's where we start to get to the point of comfort with an offer. Mm-hmm. And I want you to talk for a minute too, just with your realtor hat on, because you can have the criteria, you can have people inside of it, but that doesn't mean that you need to be at the point of like sign in blood that like, this is definitely going to happen, like all those kind of things, right? Like an offer isn't quite as scary as most people make it out to be, right?
Yeah, and that's a big thing that I try to cover with my clients, honestly, from day one, right? We start looking at houses, and as soon as they start getting interested in property, one of the things I say is, look, writing the offer is not scary. Removing the contingencies is, right? That's where it gets real. So don't be afraid of the offer. Make sure we've got everything in place, but don't be afraid of the offer. We're going to write it in a way where we're building in contingencies to give ourselves some stopgap or some safety net, right? And I think that's a huge point where people get stressed out about this thing feeling really final and scary, but it's not the final step. It's a really good important out that you need to make sure you have in mind.
Yeah. So I want to talk for a minute about, because, pharmacists are definitely safety oriented. And when you say that there's stop gaps and safety checks and things like that warms my heart, right? Like that's a good thing for us. So tell me about like an inspection contingency would be one of those, right?
Yeah. And we've covered this a little more on other episodes as well, but just to kind of briefly go over it, right? You can set into the offer, and again, in most states, check with your local agent, but in most areas, you can set into the offer that, we want to get a contractor in there and we have 7 days to review the findings of that inspection, right? Or we want to get a home inspector in there and we have 3 days to review the findings of that inspection. And that gives you the safety net where you can say, look, if we don't like the results of the inspection, we can do A, B, or C. And a lot of times it's renegotiate. We can walk away. We can, proceed with the deal as is. We have that option, and it puts the power back in the buyer's pocket of, look, if this does not go well, if we find a major foundational issue that is, potentially harmful to the safety of the house, right? Then we can walk away. Now, again, that's not the case in every location, right? Some municipalities vary, so make sure you check. But in a lot of cases, you can write in that safety net, and it's pretty standard in most locations.
Yeah. So I think the inspection contingency can provide a lot of safety there. I know a couple others that we routinely see are some sort of appraisal contingency or like lender verification contingency. Can you explain that one as well?
Yeah. So basically with an appraisal contingency, you're saying that you are not going to be paying cash. You're going to have someone footing the mortgage for that, right? So having a bank coming in and paying for the property. And if during that process, the bank wants to make sure that what they're buying for you or what they're lending to you for is worth what you say it is. So if it's a $500,000 house, the bank is going to have an independent appraiser come out and determine if that house is worth $500,000. If they find that it's only worth $450,000, they're only going to lend to you up to that $450,000. There could be a gap in the appraisal, and you've heard people waiving that appraisal gap, which is when they make up the difference in cash. But again, that's a piece of that offer that is almost always in place, is that there is a contingency that this house has to appraise or I can't buy it. If an appraiser comes in and says it's worth way less than we agreed on, I'm not going to be able to continue with this deal because I'm not bringing cash to the table. So there are a lot of ways to manage that, but that's a pretty common contingency built into most offers.
Yeah, I think a third one that I see pretty often, particularly when buying rental real estate, if there's a tenant already in place, is some kind of contingency where you get to review documents.
Yeah.
Because it seems pretty uncommon, at least in my area, to say like, well, I want to see the copy of the lease and I want to see a trailing 12 and like whatever other documents. But within the purchase process, in some sort of inspection window, that's a little more common. Is that what you see also?
Yeah, and a lot of times if there's a tenant there already, I'll write it in where we want an estoppel agreement in place before we proceed. So that basically means that not only are we verifying the documents that we're receiving from the seller, we're getting them signed by the tenant to basically say, yes, this is what I am aware of, right? So this is my rent rate, this is my security deposit. That way there's no confusion, because I've seen that be a problem in the past. Actually, I learned that one personally so that I could pass it on to my clients and do the right thing moving forward. So
no, and those are frustrating lessons to learn. So yeah, that's a good one. And I'm still waiting on the estoppel to come in on one that I'm under contract to buy right now. The estoppel agreement to make sure that the tenant, that they are on the same page with whatever the landlord is claiming the lease says. The trailing 12 or some sort of rent roll, rent history, something like that would demonstrate if the tenant has been paying on time, like a history of rent checks received, other expenses and things may be in that mess also. So that can be something that's helpful to dive into and see, because there's always the potential claim of like, yeah, tenant's a great payer. And you look at the trailing 12 and they missed the last 5 months of rent, like those can be red flags too. So looking at all the documents, looking at the appraisal process, you could have an inspector in there. And so that gives you lots of checkpoints. But those are things generally you're not going to have your property manager get deeply involved in the process before an offer. You're probably not going to hire an appraiser before the offer. You're probably not going to have a full-on home inspection before the offer, right? Those are things that you would do after you get a property under contract. Is that right?
Yeah. And keep in mind too, all of these things, like the theme of the episode, right? All the things we just talked about, you can do without ever setting foot in that property, right? A lot of this is going to be managed by your agent or by your contractor. Again, if you're buying your own personal residence, I definitely recommend my clients come with me to walk with the inspector. But if you're buying an investment property, the inspector is going to be there with the agent. You can have the estoppel agreements figured out through your agents. Like all that stuff is done while you're doing your regular job and the pros are taking care of it. So these are all going on kind of in the background while you're purchasing the property.
Absolutely. So it can sound like a lot of work, but you don't necessarily need to be involved in much of any of that other than making sure that you are understanding the results of each step and you've got people around you, the professionals around you that are reducing that to very clear data points and they're educating you along the way, which is super helpful. And yeah, we've been through that in the past and it's It's just so helpful. So any other tips on the realtor side of kind of writing that into a contract?
I think ultimately just having that conversation with your realtor before you're ever going to write, that way you know what is being written in to protect you, right? A lot of realtors use a standard contract from their broker, and they have great protections already written in already. But ask them, what's in place? What can we add? What do you recommend? That way, when you're ready to write the offer, you're not having these in-depth 20-minute conversations on each piece. You've already got it figured out. You know what the expectation is right from the beginning. So set that up in advance. Make sure you ask the right questions with your agent, and you'll get off on the right foot.
Yeah, I think that conversation in advance and that clear communication up front is super helpful, because I know when we walked the first few properties with our agent, that really helped my wife and I to get comfortable with what we were doing and to get comfortable and build that trusting relationship with our agent so that we could trust those kind of from a distance. Like, what did you see? I've walked properties with you. I've seen what you've seen. I feel like that was a way for me to slowly inch into this, being able to do this without being there, because in reality, there was only so many evenings out of the week that I really wanted to be gone looking at houses, right? Like I can't do that 7 days a week. And so detaching from that has helped us to buy more properties than we otherwise would have.
So again, just to recap, great way to purchase property without ever setting foot in the property. You got to make sure you've got great people in place. You got to make sure that you have your criteria established in advance, and make sure that you're ready for that offer and know what goes into the offer before you're even writing it. And don't be afraid of it. Like we talked about before, the offer is not the final step. So don't be afraid of the offer. It's an important and really monumental step, but it's not the final one. And so don't put too much on it. Make sure you proceed and get that house under contract before you're going anywhere else.
Yeah. So with that, again, circling back to the 3 key areas of things to think about. One is to make sure that you have the right people involved. You've got the people in place that you have had these proactive conversations with, you trust to walk these properties for you, that you've set your clear criteria in advance so that when you get the information in from that trusted team, you know what to do with it and you can act quickly. And then writing that offer clearly with the safety points in there so that you can move forward confidently with that offer.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that helps walk everybody through the idea of how to purchase a property while not actually seeing it. If you've got other questions, we'd love to hear them. We'd love to take these questions and really dive into them and talk about them on our episodes. So head over to the YFP Facebook group, the YFP REI Facebook group, if you want to drop a question, or head over to yfprealestate.com and you can connect with us. We'd love to hear from you guys. So hope you enjoyed the show. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks so much. Before we wrap up today's show, let's hear an important mention from our sponsor, Lima1 Capital. Are you a real estate investor looking for the right lender that can finance all your deals and help you scale? Lima1 Capital is the best suite of loan products in the industry. Whether that's fix and flips, fix and holds, building new construction, or buying rental properties, they have incredible financing solutions for it all. A reliable, common sense lender is one of the most important parts of your investment team, and that's exactly what you get at Lima1. Let Lima1 Capital show you how they've helped thousands of real estate investors scale and increase their wealth. Check them out at lima1.com/YFP or call 800-259-0595 to speak with a consultant in preparation for your next project. That's lima1.com/YFP.
Thanks for listening to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. If you like what you heard on today's show, please leave us a review and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. If you have a question, know someone that would make a good guest, or want to connect with Nate or David, head on over to yfprealestate.com and join the growing YFP Real Estate Investing Facebook group. As we conclude this week's episode of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided to you for your informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on this podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist, unless otherwise noted, and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you for your support of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. Have a great rest of your week.